Trump will return to the Oval Office for a second term tomorrow when he's sworn in as the new U.S. president. The presidential inauguration comes a day after a long-awaited ceasefire between Hamas and Israel is expected to come into effect, which the Trump administration has largely taken credit for facilitating. The South African government has welcomed the respite, calling for a just and lasting peace and advocating for Palestinian sovereignty. But what implications, if any, will a second Trump presidency have for South Africa's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice? Our reporter Latashia Naidoo brings us more around this discussion. And Latashia, the issue about this court case is, even in retrospect, is who should be held accountable for the mass murders that we've seen taking place in Gaza, and on the other end as well for that attack that had happened in Israel on October the 11th.
Good morning, Aldrin. Yes, of course. We know that South Africa's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice is for primarily contravention of the Genocide Convention. And amongst other things, South Africa is accusing Israel of sustained genocide against the Palestinian people, but particularly on the Gaza Strip. And we know that South Africa has been lauded by the international community for taking a stance on this position that's divided nations around the world. Now, with the incoming president, 47th president of the U.S., Donald Trump, being inaugurated tomorrow, the question now is, what will South Africa's policy or position with regard to their case against Israel be, given that the Trump administration is taking credit for facilitating the ceasefire, which we're expecting to happen between Gaza and Israel within the next few hours? And tomorrow's inauguration is on the back of that ceasefire, that after 15 months of continued attacks on the Palestinian people, and particularly on the Gaza Strip. But here to tell us more on the issue of how this Trump presidency will have an effect, if any, on South Africa's position with regard to its case against Israel and the stance on Palestine from the South African perspective moving forward, is Professor Usuf Chikte of the Palestine Solidarity Movement. Professor, thank you for speaking to us this morning. We've been talking about the Trump presidency and the implications for South Africa with regard to our current stance on Palestine and Israel and beyond.
Thank you. The Trump presidency and his blustering way and his gung-ho attitude has certainly put the brakes on the South African officialdom with respect to its enthusiasm for curbing and curtailing and litigating against the genocidal Israeli regime. And that is what we're witnessing. They've appointed Marco Rubio, an extreme Zionist, as Secretary of State. I don't know how much more worse he can do than Blinken, but that he certainly made a commitment in terms of his pro-Israeli stance. He's also, the House of Representatives recently also passed a bill where they want to sanction the ICC judges for putting out an arrest warrant on Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. So these are some of the signs, and the enthusiasm with which the South African government has taken up this case now relative to its previous position, considering its compromised position within the GNU, is also influenced by the noises that is taking place in Washington.
But surely this call for a ceasefire indicates a move towards a positive position in terms of eventually seeking peace in Palestine. How does that strengthen South Africa's commitment to its ongoing cause to fight this genocide and hold those responsible within international courts like the ICJ? Does it affect our position in any way? Do you think that there's going to be more sustained efforts now that there's a ceasefire, or do you think, like you said, the enthusiasm will die down as a result of the international community now taking a step forward and calling for this ceasefire?
It's a mixed feeling that the world is experiencing. On the one hand, there is the glimmer of hope that things will improve. On the other hand, Israel has announced this ceasefire with the bombing of even more people on Thursday, immediately after the ceasefire was announced. They've also indicated very clearly that the three phases that are going to be enacted in achieving a ceasefire, in the search for a ceasefire, they're going to stick to phase one with the release of the captives, and they have every intention to call upon to go back to the battlefield and to bomb even more. And Netanyahu said this morning that he has the support of the outgoing and the incoming president for this. While we are very elated at the prospect, and we're full of hope at the prospect of relief for the Palestinians, we must also tell ourselves not to have false hope.
Thank you, Professor, for that insight. Well, Aldrin, the enthusiasm, I'm told, by the South African government in particular with regard to our case that we've taken to the highest courts, the international courts of justice in holding or calling for Israel to be held responsible for crimes of genocide is going to be a sustained effort, as we've just heard from Professor Chikte. But an interesting perspective is that this is a complete change to Trump's foreign policy compared to his previous presidency, where he had a very strong approach and strong relationship with Israel, and particularly his support for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But from the South African perspective, as we've just heard from Professor Chikte, the case against Israel will continue. The fact that the U.S. has been spearheading the ceasefire, which is looking to take place within the next few hours today, is a sign of potentially positive outcomes in this 15-month genocide that we've been seeing taking place in Gaza. Aldrin.
Thank you so much for that. And the big question is, will it last? And will Hamas as well as Israel adhere